Okay, let's get this going. I see a few people are popping into the webinar, so let's get this going. Hopefully everybody can see this screen. Okay, today's topic is Google Analytics 4 migration, what marketers needs to know. So yeah, excited to be here, and I'm gonna see some people join shortly, but let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna start. See, are you in the right place? This webinar is for. Okay, so we all heard, the Google Analytics transition. Google announced that, Google's sunsetting to the Universal Analytics and moving to the GA4. And we all here because we wanted to know what the GA4 is about, how is it different? And if you're kind of making decisions, business decisions, marketing decisions using Google Analytics, then you're definitely here at the right place. But this webinar is not really for administrators who really really in the weeds of administrating and setting up the GA4 in the back end. So just want to put that out here. So why is this important? Obviously with the sunsetting, you could lose data, lose insights. And one thing I want to put out is GA4 is very different from Universal Analytics. And one thing that Google is starting to pay attention and taking action on is making this analytics platform have better privacy controls, addressing some of the cookieless measurements, GDPR, CCPA, that sort of things is really getting a lot of attention in the industry. Of course, if your boss asks you, like, why didn't you mention this sooner? Sure, here you are, you'll get some information that you could prepare yourself updating your team. A little bit about myself. My name is Kris Irizawa. Thank you for being here. I'm Director of Analytics at Eboost. I have worked at various companies in Japan, with Merrill Lynch, mostly in the fintech financial sectors, but also lived in Silicon Valley, worked at tech startups, as well as enterprise like Logitech, Bill.com, and so forth. And here I am at the Eboost, been with the group for about 4 years now. And I have 3 kids and 2 hamsters, so a little bit of myself, and I like traveling, exploring new restaurants. So I've been in this data and marketing for about 20 years. Don't want to give out my age, but so I've seen the industry and the data analytics platform mature in many different ways. So hopefully I could add some value here. So real quick on the agenda, today I'm going to be covering just basically the overview of the Google's plan and transition schedule. And hopefully we could cover enough about the differences between Universal Analytics and Google GA4. The data collection method, about the data itself, and the ways to analyze the GA4 data, and some of the migration plans we have in mind. And I'd like to have some minutes in the end for Q&A. And my hope is that you walk away knowing what the GA4 migration timeline is in clear picture, and understand some of the values it has to offer, and possible next steps, and hopefully you get some ideas around what are the next steps you could actually consider. But before I see that more people are joining, let me try this new feature, polling. So maybe I could get some responses here about, I have 2 questions here. So hopefully you see a dialogue pop up. Just some brief questions about, have you implemented GA4 already? How often do you use Google Analytics data? Just gonna get a temperature of like where you're at with this Google Analytics journey. Well, I see people answering. It's great. I see that 10 people, 11 people are responded. That's great. I'll close this in a few seconds, but I see that, yeah, about 55% of people said they have implemented GA4. So I presume you have a good feel of what the product is. I see that other half is not really on it or they don't know. I see that about half of the people are actually really utilizing Google Analytics data on a day-to-day basis, and the rest of it on a weekly or really on an ad hoc basis. Thank you for that. There you go. Hopefully you see that results real quick there. Nice feature here. All right, that's fun. So real quick, so why we're here, as you all know, like Google has announced that they're sunsetting Universal Analytics, and the measurements will basically stop in next year, 2023, July 1st. additional things we learned from the announcement is that, there's no guarantee that your data will be accessible in Universal Analytics after 6 months from 2023. So there's really no hard date when, you can actually start have that data available to you. And of course, the GA360 users who are actually paying for the enterprise version will have a longer grace period. If you kind of put this in the context of like the timeline here, Universal Analytics will continue to track in the back end until 2023 July. From there, tracking stops, but reports is accessible. What does that really mean? Is basically all the data collection in the back end stops, but the reporting aggregate data that you see in Universal Analytics will be accessible. We just don't know how long that will be available to you, right? We think it's about 6 months, but that's what it is. And GA360 users will have a longer grace period here. So roughly around, I think it was like October 1st, 2023. And Google suggests, start doing the migration or implement GA4, by July 1st. And part of the reason is because it's a very different platform. So if you want to get like year-over-year data comparing like July, data 2023 to 2022, it's probably good to have that 22 July data. So from that perspective, you probably want to get going that GA4 is accessible now and implemented. So that's kind of like the higher overview of it. But I see that half of the people haven't really don't know about the GA4 in general. So let me briefly just run through, because you might see some terminologies in this slides and they might be confusing. So immediately, this is a Google's merchandise store demo account. But if you see on the left side, well, immediately off the bat, it's very different, right? Like the panels of data is different. But importantly, when you hover over to the left side, there's reports, explore, advertising, configure, and towards the bottom, administration stuff. Report, I'm going to refer to as console report. So when you click it, you're going to see like the real-time reports, acquisition, engagement, monetization, retention. So they call in this section lifestyle. Anything regards to user data, like your gender, demographic data, it's all under here. And explore is basically a report where you can actually create a lot more customized kind of like report that's not in the console. So if you want to design specific views, charts, you're allowed to kind of create that custom measures and dimensions and charts from this explore report, which is a little bit more advanced way to kind of show some data. Of course, configure is where you configure some of the events and tracking, define conversion and audience, that sort of thing. So a lot of the important definitions of your data event tracking is going to be here under configuration. If you ever follow Twitter, like a GA4, like, people are talking about, if there's anything, there's mixed opinions about it. And a lot of that opinion is probably, my guess is really referring to a lot of this look and feels of this, reportings. Because if really, when you look and say traffic acquisition, it looks very different, right? Like to some degree, it's maybe the table stuff is similar, but when you start looking at like the drop down, swapping out this first dimension, it's quite different from the Universal Analytics. And you can see like, it has user sessions, engaged sessions. Oh, where's the bounce rate? It's all gone. When you look at conversion events and you really click this little button here, you see like many, many different kind of conversion value. So there's a lot of things to kind of watch out for. So a lot of this stuff is really new, right? So, this whole concept is important. And of course, when you go into like properties, there's no views, and which we'll get into that. Going back to the slide. So hopefully you got a glimpse of like that, the feel of it, and some of the terminology I picked up here is actually going to be important. So continuing on, so what's up with GA4, right? What's the aim here? Why are they doing this? Personal take is, GA4, there's two things that really sticks out. My guess is like the GA4 is really trying to improve the reporting and on the customer journey, getting that visibility. It really enables marketers like you to invest more in Google Ads, right? So that's their bread and butter in terms of from the business standpoint. Of course, GA was started to kind of help, users, internet users and website owners to really kind of understand the engagement so they can make better decisions of optimize the customer experience after the clicks that happen from the search. But it has matured in many ways, right? The second one is to increase the use of Google Cloud Platform. When you really look at the market share, Amazon AWS has a big market share. Like they have about a third of the market share for the cloud platforms, right? And second is Microsoft Azure. And then Google Cloud accounts for about 10%, a little less than 10%. So from that perspective, Google Analytics 4 has a native integration to, suck all that data into a big data warehouse and, do some more customization from a reporting standpoint. And of course, when you use Google BigQuery, you become a user of GCP, and you're going to start charging you some data to kind of host that data and use it. So, but that's from the business side of things, and that's what we think, GA4 is going to be important for Google, but this looks like it's going to be continue to be free. But important thing is, like, at the very high level, how is this going to be very different from GA4 from a feature and functionality standpoint, right? When you look at the Google Analytics in general, like it's really a product that's been about 20 years old. It all started from trying to help marketers answer like which campaign ad is most effective for visitors, and what's converting, which landing page is effective, which generating the most traffic and converting. It's really to kind of help understand after they take action ads or came to the website, like what are they doing, right? It's really the action piece. And it kind of misses like a lot of the attention and interest that's really happening at the top of the funnel. And really, when you look at the report and how they really design grouping that, it's really focused on how the traffic was acquired, how they be fed on the site, and how they convert. Conversely, you saw on the GA4 earlier, that reporting in GA4 side is really grouped as in life cycle. So it's really a customer journey, if you will, and that's how they're kind of articulating it. But it's really how you acquire the customer, your users to your website, how they engage, how they monetize, also retain, how they're coming back, and how they're actually buying again from your website and that sort of thing. So conceptually, it's quite different. So from that perspective, we believe GA4 is a tool to optimize, the customer journey, no matter what part of the funnel there is. So, and of course, one of the important things also is that the conversions could attribute it to, say, the first engaged channels or the pages and so forth, which I'll talk a little bit more in the next slide, in the following slide. And also how the data is really kind of structured at a very high level. Briefly mentioned in the earlier demo, but if usually in Universal Analytics, when you log in, you see like property, and within the view, you have like, unfiltered data, or filtered for only showing US data or English users or Canada or something like that, right? But the whole concept of view is gone. So GA4 has property, and anything within a property, if you want to divide it out, it's called data stream. So you can have like a property one property where it tracks the website, and also say mobile app, for example, it could reside in the same property, and so forth. If you want to set a different property for Android and website, sure, you can do that. Historically, when you look at the older version, Universal Analytics, you would set up a website and mobile apps tracking separately, right? And you might use like Firebase Analytics to do mobile app analytics and so forth. So really, this is why, it's important, because GA4 really trying to address that holistic view of your user and customer, regardless of which kind of devices you are in. So the concept of data stream is important, because that's how your data is going to be set up to kind of ingest the data from. And I mentioned about the conversion attribution a little bit, but what does that really mean? Some of the new things that we see in GA4 that's wildly different is GA4 provides like first user, like medium source campaign dimension default. Well, what is that first user, right? So it really goes back to attributes back all the way to the Facebook ad, for example. Like typically, for example, right, if the particular customer clicked on Facebook ad, days later, they came to social organic, search on website, Google search, and it came to the website, didn't convert. Later on, they clicked on some kind of PPC ads, and then they came to the website organically, directly, typing in a browser or something, and they converted. So Google's default attribution, a lot of people refer to that as last click, but really technically speaking, it's last non-direct click attribution. It sounds complicated, right? Basically, that will default to the last known kind of medium that came from. So usually the default attribution would be it'll give the conversion credit to the PPC ad here. So a lot of marketers really kind of missed out that, hey, we spend a lot of money on driving the traffic into the very top of the funnel, but how's that contributing to the conversion? Historically, you can actually use the model comparison report within Universal Analytics to look at first click, last click, and your linear time decay, that sort of thing. But this kind of first click, if you will, or first user is attached to many reports within the GA4 data, right? So you can actually start looking at the contribution of first source. But not only that, now you can actually look at conversion of first-time buyer or like repeat purchaser. So from that perspective, LTV calculation is also baked into like conversions. So you can actually see, oh, which channel actually drove the higher LTV customers, first ads or something like that. So it's not just a last click channel that you can actually look at, not just an immediate conversion, but also lifetime value of things. So it gives a lot of data on the web analytics side of things, which is wildly different from universal analytics. Taking a look in a little bit more details here, as well, when I mentioned it was very different, how it's tracked is also very different. Like universal analytics was designed around website, right? Back in the days where website was the main driver of the traffic to your property. But now, a lot of marketers investing in other companies has mobile apps along with the website. The data model, universal analytics is based off hits. Every time you load up a URL, there's a lot of hits that goes to the server, and then it groups like, oh, this is actually one page view. Oh, this sequence of page view that happens within a session. So the lowest common denominator data here is really hits to the server, and it does a lot of data massaging back in. On the GA4 front, it's really event and parameters. Everything that goes in a GA4 is tracked as an event. And that's kind of like it. And that's, the lowest common denominator data as events, which I'll go into more detail. And the reporting model is really designed for in the universal analytics UA. It's really about sessions, like how many unique users I'm getting within a X time period, but how many times is this particular user visiting within a certain time period, and session based, right? How many sessions is really happening within this week or day? And GA4 is really designed around user scope, user level data. So yeah, session is great, but at the end of the day, we need to orchestrate the user count. So it's not just like visitors to the website is actually a user count for web, but on the mobile side, we have a different definition of user, but they're trying to normalize that so the user is user, where it's really close to like people count, right, as a unit. And machine learning integration is certainly, we live in a world where things are shifting towards AI, and machine learning is highly adopted into many different things. And GA4 is really designed to support that. We talked about the GA4 integration BigQuery. So the integration to a data warehouse is a lot more easier. Another important one is user identification. So how unique user identify universal analytics, which is purely on a cookie base, right? But GA4 gives you an option to aggregate the user count to user ID, use Google Signal, and cookie. So it's a combination of three. So from that perspective, we might expect, you should expect a lower user count when you use GA4 compared to like universal analytics. Talked about events for GA4. So, this is more a visual way to kind of show it. Like every time a user hits like a page, or do click a link on a website, everything is tracked as events, and they kind of retain that as events. And then the reporting side, they aggregate it up into, page views or sessions or user count, versus universal analytics has been like, okay, show me the page views, and from there, stitching the data back to sessions. So how data is being collected and rolled up is wildly different. And okay, well, Kris, what's events? Like it's basically individual action that happens on your platform website, like clicking on a link, submitting a form, playing a video. So any action that really happens on the website is an event. So when we talk about session, that's different because it's talking about an individual action of user that really happens within a specific time frame. So, okay, within this time frame, how many people actually access my site, right? How many people, how many sessions had a click to a specific button or conversion, and so forth. And users, of course, is a unit to represent an individual who performs certain actions, website or mobile app. And when you look at it then from an architectural standpoint, universal analytics we design around from page view hits, and has like custom events, category, action labels, values, and has e-commerce report where you have to customize the e-commerce report in a certain way, the value kind of implemented, otherwise your e-com report is not reporting properly. And all that stuff, gets aggregated to a session and user. But in GA4, like I mentioned, there's a lot of events. Everything's held as like session events, page view events, added cart basket, purchase events, checkout events. And there's parameters that differentiates different kinds of data within that same event. And users, for example, like your age, demographic, and property, like where you live. A lot of that is not an event. It's really a property that describes who you are. So those are user property. So an example of this is like when you go to a purchase event, this particular example shows that there's two different parameters attached to this conversion or purchase event. For example, shipping type. Oh, it looks like a lot of people use FedEx Ground for this purchase. But in that purchase, then you also have transaction ID, right? It might also have like a billing zip code and stuff like that. But you see my point. So when you say, hey, show me the purchase conversion, yeah, you could use this, but if you want more granularity, you're like, okay, what makes up this purchase? You can actually set up where parameter would differentiate the details of the purchase. So the concept is wildly different from universal analytics, because a lot of that was heavily customized, reliant on how you track conversion event as a category or something, and label, action, all this stuff was really heavily customized to make that happen in reporting side. And of course, how you set up goals is different too. So in prior, you have to go into Google Analytics and say, okay, people hit the thank you page, that's conversion. So there's kind of different ways to go about setting up the conversion. But in GA4, everything's event-based driven. So if you have a conversion event, make sure your GTM tag manager is firing that event, and then you define that as a conversion on the configuration of GA4. So you might have like hundreds of so events, but you might have one or two conversions. And this is where you kind of switch it and tell Google this is a conversion. So this step is probably very important, right? And one thing that I hear a lot is, hey, Kris, the bounce rate's gone. Like, that's very important. And you're not going to see bounce rate reported in GA4 anymore. You could do that if you integrate the data into Google BigQuery and write custom queries and kind of get to that number. But technically speaking, the session is also different. But before we get into engage session, now how's the session different, right? So, first of all, the number session GA4 is counting the number of sessions that began on a site or app with when the session starts. Okay, so there's like this little queue from like the backend says, okay, session start event fires. I say, hey, GA4, start tracking in. And then on the universal analytics side, there's many reasons for it to start counting multiple sessions from the same user. Like, for example, like you're in the midnight, you look in a website and then time cuts off, or you come from a different source within this 30 minutes window. Like Google Universal Analytics will track those like separate sessions. Both the GA4 will do a better job stitching together that session. It's like, well, you cut over like the midnight, but you're still on the same website. So, and the session counter started and, they're not ending it. So from that perspective, we're not going to count it as two different sessions. So from a technical standpoint, it's quite different how it's calculating sessions too. Now, that's why I think when you switch over to GA4, your session count might be lower than Universal Analytics. Regarding to the bounce rate, they have switched over that metrics to engage session, right? So engage session is more like a positive way of saying that people who didn't bounce, but it has a little bit more to it. Like people who stayed on the site 10 seconds or longer, or had one or more conversion events, or had 2 or more page views or screen views. So it has a lot more meaning to this engage, or definitely, I think it's technically speaking, it's not bounce people. So, it's really positive way to show who's really kind of sticky to, from the audience standpoint. So from that perspective, when you look at engaged sessions per user, it's a ratio of engaged sessions divided by number of users. So it kind of gives you a perspective who's really staying on your website and really taking action. Even though the landing page could be just one page and they're not going to any page, converting on the spot, you can certainly kind of capture that and get some ideas of whether people are engaging on that. There are some restrictions. Yeah, oh yeah, great. You could track events, like this just throw 1,000 events and start tracking it. But no, like this is still a free product and there's a lot of more kind of like restrictions. Like, for example, like total number of events in conversions you could define is like 30 per property. So there's still some restrictions and how long you can name the event, that sort of thing. And there's a lot to it. So I think Google support document will have this highlighted, but just be mindful of some of these restrictions. You probably can't remember all, but just want to let you know it's there. And one of the important one too is data retention period. Like, it was good old days, Universal Analytics is free, it's great, and it retains the data, in the back end for 50 months, which is about 4 years and 2 months, right? Great, but by default, when you switch over to GA4, it defaults to 2 months with data retention. So I strongly advise you switch that to like 14 months so that it retains the longer data. But one thing to note is like, just because like the data is like 2 months, you're not retaining it, doesn't mean you can't see the data in the reporting. So what this really means is when you look at GA4 data and you see the reports, those are more aggregate data. Like they already did the calculations for you. So even though the data retention is 2 months, it's been like 4 months already, you're not really like seeing like zero data in report. It's in the back end, it's just not collecting the events or storing the events, right? So the aggregate data will be there, so you can still see the traffic. The problem becomes is when you start looking at, like, let's say you have a data retention of 2 months, and then you start looking at, like, hey, 6 months ago, let's dive into, like, all these people who purchases, what landing page they looked at, and start what kind of, when you start like slicing the data in the explore report, that's when you start seeing like errors and stuff like that. So on an aggregate level, it's fine, but you might as well just increase that if you're going to do a lot more heavier analysis on GA4's platform. Additional changes, I think we all get accustomed to that channel group report, like, oh, paid search, organic search, paid display, paid, we're kind of get accustomed to that kind of Google Analytics channel grouping. But with the GA4, it gives a lot more kind of definition, especially if you're on, like, say, using display and video 360 or search as 360 natively. You'll start recognizing those channels or the clicks from those channels as a paid video, cross network, audio, paid shopping. So there's a lot of like new channel group definitions, if you will. And it's all like kind of documented on the support page of like how that, gets reported up and grouped as channel group. And certainly you could customize that, but it's something to kind of watch out for. So if you historically has looked at Google, say paid search, for example, for everything, anything for Google ads, then just be careful, because some of that data going forward might be in a, say, pay video or something, because that you have some ads on YouTube or something like that. Other things too, like predictive audience measures is something, machine learning enablement. You're starting to use some of this data and allow marketers and with a lot of conversion data to start, using some advanced features like this, where, hey, Google Analytics 4 is capturing a lot of event level data. Can Google Analytics really predict which of my customers is going to churn in the next 7 days? Out of all these customers, who's likely going to purchase the next 7 days based off behavior data? So a lot of that is machine learning stuff that's really kind of baked into Google Analytics 4. But the catch is that from our experience, you need about like 1,000 transactions per week. So if you don't have that, if you don't meet the volume criteria, most likely this feature doesn't come up in the audience setting. This audience setting, when you go into, I believe it's in Explore or advertising, and you try to create the audience, like, it's one of the options for you to kind of create this 7-day purchasers are likely to convert in the next 7 days, or likely to leave, likely the first time buy the next 7 days. And a lot of this data is, of course, integrated Google Ads, so you can actually do some pretty cool targeting with that. But again, you need to have a lot of like volume and conversion to kind of take advantage of these new features. And I think Google is trying to be very, careful about enabling this, because of course, if it's not accurate, then Google's going to take a lot of heat. So for the machine learning to kind of work, you need a lot of volume data, right? So just something for you to know. Now, when we talk about like ways to analyze GA4 data, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like, opinions around GA4, like how the report, might not be challenging. It's very different. It's hard to get used to. Sure, if you just look at the console report that I showed earlier, like, yeah, if you go into it, it looks very different. But don't keep in mind, there's a Explore report that I showed you, earlier, that you can actually build some customized report from that perspective. So that might give you a lot of bandwidth to kind of start matching up some of the look and feel that you like from Universal Analytics. But keep in mind, the data retention is, the default 2 months, but if you have it at 4 months, great. But if you want to start doing some, deep dive analysis, from a year and a half ago, like, then you're going to start losing that data. But what if we want to do that? Like, well, this is useless. I want to look at 3 years ago. Eventually, I want to use GA4 to look at 3 years ago versus now, or 2 years ago versus now, like, which I'll talk about later, but which is more of a BigQuery integration. But speaking a little bit more about the Explore report, for example, you saw like, it kind of looks like Data Studio, like Tableau or Power BI, where you define what rows and columns. It's kind of like a pivot table, Excel sheets. You create filters, segments, and you could kind of design, tables in certain ways and start adding the extra dimension to start slicing, dicing data. So from here, a lot of times you could get what you need if you kind of design it right. So if you're comfortable going and creating Explore report, sure, anybody could go in and create it. But if you have an admin who actually more savvy with it, you can actually ask that person too. One new thing about the Explore report is this thing called User Explore. It tracks events per user, right? So like, for example, if you're able to get the user ID or some kind of a individual ID that and you can actually go to User Explorer and start looking at this particular person. Of course, Google Analytics doesn't allow you to capture like individual name and that sort of thing, PI information. But this ID, this user, on this time did a page view, on this time they add a payment information, a couple of minutes later, like they purchase. So all this like event level data by user, by time is actually there. So it has a ways to kind of allow you to kind of get to individual level if you have that ID and look at their kind of like customer journey, right? So I don't believe Universal Analytics allow you to do this, but this is one of the new things that GA4 allows you to. And if you actually delete the user, that's probably being compliant to the GDPR, that sort of thing. So yeah, so Google has really designed around, in mind of making sure like these things are addressable. Another way to analyze GA4 data. So Console Explorer, yeah, that's great, but I need to do more. If you're in the boat, then you can use Data Studio. So Data Studio, it's I believe it's a free tool for many of us, but go in there, plug it in with GA4, and then you can start like creating some beautiful charts. If you know how to use Data Studio, then you could create some custom metrics within Data Studio and really kind of go from there. But again, keep in mind, it's not really storing data. So like your data retention period is 14 months, depending on if it's a high level numbers, sure. But if you're starting to dig into like very granular events data, then there might be some limitations in when you start looking at data beyond 14 months. Now, the advanced users are going to be interested in, well, 14 months does do I need all the raw data in my database, and then I need more sophisticated kind of like reporting. So yeah, from that perspective, within the admin, you can actually integrate GA4 data to BigQuery. And yeah, well, even if you don't use BigQuery, a lot more plugin tool, like data pipeline tools are enabling GA4 integration with, say, Redshift or some of the Microsoft database. So the ecosystem is getting more advanced and mature. So, once you get that data in your database, you can use tools like Tableau, Power BI, Data Studio to do more kind of advanced analysis. So the option is there. But I think Google is very careful about, you can't just like throw in all the data, raw data in database. Like we noticed like some of the details like age, gender, title of user, like you can't really export it and store it. So there might be some like kind of like little catch there. But yeah, so from this perspective, when you look at the high level, well, how is this different from cost perspective? GA4, of course, is free. Data Studio is, free, I believe. And technical skill required is of course, if you have like a GA admin, they can actually go and start creating some reports using Explorer, whatnot, and level analysis is really rudimentary. But with Data Studio, you can do a little bit. You have more flexibility in how you present data. But it gets a little bit more advanced when you start integrating that data with BigQuery or a database, and then using Data Studio from that. Because to get the data, you need to write SQL code or SQL query to get the right data you need from the database and then plug it into your BI. So hopefully this is kind of one way to look at ways to analyze and see how that different from cost and skill sets perspective, right? And of course, the objective is very different. For example, very basic GA4, hey, I just need a basic reporting. How's traffic going up or down? But if you really need like blend multiple sources of data and do more ad hoc analysis and customize the dashboarding, yeah, you definitely need a lot more than just a report from GA4. Time check. I'm gonna leave about 5 minutes for QA, but towards the end here. But as far as the migration, so Kris, like how does Eboost kind of think about this, right? I kind of look at it in like phases. We're in a phase where people are interested, marketers are interested in migrating or integrating or implementing GA4 to begin with. So the first phase is really about getting what you have in Universal Analytics and really, get that going in GA4. Like just, review your GTM tags, event tracking, just get the GA4 started and running and start collecting data. And I presume the next phase, a lot of that is going to be utilization. What does that mean? Because once you got data in GA4, the next thing is like you're going to be asking more questions. Like, well, I used to have this data in Universal Analytics. Like, can we get this GA4? Or I want to see GA4 allows me to look at certain things in more new ways. So can we do X, Y, and Z? Can we create more custom report? So this is where you start getting your hands dirty to kind of start answering some business questions, right? So from that perspective, building out the documents, requirements, and building out the GA4 reports, start utilizing beyond just implementing GA4 and migrating it to it. The next phase is, okay, yeah, those are great. We're starting to use it, but more users will, if they want more like out of it, like integrate, I need all the raw data in the data warehouse to look at year over year in a more sophisticated way. I have an e-commerce business, so I need more of that e-commerce report, customized. B2B, you want more of the integration of CRM. So there's a lot of things could be coming out of beyond the standard usage. And then once you start adopting all of this, the next phase is really kind of, adopt it and business as usual with Google Analytics, run your business with data, which is like maintaining it, when your website changes, add the events, make sure things are QA'd, good data is coming in, and continue integrating with a new technology platform if you have any. So it's really the apply and really all the good stuff happens. When you apply this to kind of like timeline, the GA4, maybe a good way to look at it is think about the migration or integration of implementing GA4, and then really in the next few weeks, if you really care about getting the year over year starting from July, get that going as soon as possible. And then, the next year before they stop tracking the universal analytics, start utilizing GA4, get you accustomed to it, see if the report is good enough. If not, start to use, apply, and really extend any features of reporting if there's something critical missing, especially in e-commerce or B2B. And then, of course, when reporting becomes available at some point, by then, my hope is marketers who are already on GA4 or adopting the new web analytics platform, right? And so just real quick, so if you're not really technical or if you need help, feel free, we're here for you, Eboost, so we could definitely help you with a migration plan, assess the GTM, the events tag, and really see, get that migration going. That's the first step, not just identifying events, but, making sure that GA4 is added with the necessary tags for your business, right? That's required. In summary, I'm going to shift over Q&A just right before that, just kind of wrap things up from a summary standpoint. Universal Analytics is sensitive, so it's official, right? Take action soon. That's really the key call to action. Hopefully you understood some of the base core concept, the differences there of the GA4 from the Universal Analytics. And take action if you really care about the year over year. Start, changing the data retention stuff, right? Of 2 months to 14 months. And if you really, GA4 and GA Universal Analytics is a very different product. So don't stress about the differences so much. Really just think about this as a new tool. So I've talked to some companies where they said, this is not even a migration. This is really implementing GA4. Sure it is. That's another way to look at it too. It's a totally different thing. And also planning is important, right? Because everything's event-based driven. So a lot of times your Google Tag Manager, how you track and how you pass the data on as a conversion or like tracking meaningful events, it's very important. Out of the box, there's a lot of events that Google provides. So don't create redundancy. So from that perspective, like talk to, understand exactly what you're trying to do with the tool and talk about, long-term perspective, see how you can actually use it from a BI perspective. Do you need that raw data, and do you need more advanced usage of GA4? That's something to kind of watch out for and think about down the line. About Eboost, so I think some of our clients are on this call too, but for the first time, if you're seeing us, we're Eboost Consulting based out of San Diego. We're a boutique agency, and we specialize in paid media, especially around paid search, paid social, data analytics, and we are a proud member of 1% for the Planet, trying to give back to the earth. And we are supporting a nonprofit partner at Wild Coast. So you can see our employee clean the coast here. Good job, guys. If you have any questions, definitely go to our site and contact us, or you could reach out to me personally, Kris at eboostconsulting.com or accounts at eboostconsulting.com. Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes here or 4 minutes to take questions if you have any. Let me click this Q&A. I don't see any questions come through. So yeah, there should be a Q&A button somewhere, and if you have any questions, let me know. Let's see, I see a chat. What are your favorite reports you've built in GA4? Yeah, good question. If you saw a glimpse of what I shared, which I'll go back because I like that one. Like, for example, this one is a good one. Like, for example, GA4, I mentioned that conversion, for example, it now could differentiate whether they're a first-time purchaser, right? So from that perspective, you say, hey, first channel that the user ever visited from organic search or whatever channel, what devices they came from, and what, not just by traffic volume, but session volume, but also are they engaging or not? And are they actually buying from you for the first time? So this is a unique kind of GA4 thing, right? Also using the Explore report. So you can actually see, well, my paid search desktop, typically, yeah, we get more traffic from mobile, but if you look at engagement rate, it's actually coming a lot more coming from desktop, and it's actually converting a lot more better than the organic search desktop. So there's some insights here that tells you that, yeah, well, this is search actually drives first-time customer, right? So this is a good one. Another one is like, I like to look at, organic too, to see how your content's really pulling well, driving traffic, but also how is that converting? Because, if you could actually do this in universal analytics too, but if you could imagine this combining with some of the cool additional metrics like first-time users and channels, repeat purchase LTV, it'll be a very interesting kind of data to look at. Thank you for that. That was a good question. In my other session, I had some questions from an enterprise client where, they were talking about how is this going to impact the tracking efforts, right? I think a lot of people actually use like, if you're on Shopify or some kind of e-commerce platform, there might be some plugins that enables your enhanced e-commerce report and e-commerce report in Universal Analytics. Of course, those plugins may not work for GA4. So from that perspective, if you really rely on some of the revenue figure and how that attribution from different channels to sales, then yeah, you definitely want to take a look at, how that data is going to come through in the new kind of GA4 environment. And of course, like I mentioned, it's very event-based driven, right? So in the tag management side, there's going to be a lot of work for businesses like yours to really define these events at the tag management level, so that Google Analytics have more control of getting that data, and then design your event and how you want to roll that up to reporting is going to be very important. Because the catch is, just because you enable event tracking and report doesn't mean those data are going to show up in a report, because there's a lot of features in here that a lot of people miss, where, for example, I showed you purchase broken out by shipping method type and transaction ID. Those data won't show up in the report unless you enable custom dimension, I believe. So there's little tricks in here that didn't really get into like on the administration side of things, but there's a lot of things to watch out for in the back end when you really adopt this new technology. In Universal Analytics, my understanding is that there are user level, session level, and page level metrics, and that it was important to make reports that mix and match them incorrectly. Do you know if that is the case in GA4? I mean, it was important not to mix and match different level metrics incorrectly. I think a lot of that is what I just mentioned about getting the event data right. So that's really the first step, which is very different from Universal Analytics. So if you say, hey, this conversion, someone purchased from your website, and then you append a lot of data to that, like a parameter that I showed you. So yeah, make sure you get the right event data to the reporting. That's step one. And make sure you're tracking the right data and coming in correctly as GA4 is the right first step, right? And on the reporting side, you want to make sure the report is actually filtering and representing the right, say, data to show that. That's step one. As far as like page, session, all this stuff became more like a metric. So all that stuff is rolled into events data. So from that perspective, I guess this little headache, as you saw in the data model, headache on the platform side to really worry about. But what the next worry is making sure that you get the right event kind of data, because the dimension and measure is very clearly distinct now. So that's why it's the Explore report, data studio integration. A lot of that allows the reporting side of things to be more flexible. You couldn't do that with Universal Analytics. So getting the right event data is super important. And hopefully when you design it right, the dimension and measure and reporting side will take care of a lot of the headache that we saw in universal analytics. And that dimensions where mix and match stuff happens too, right? So in data studio, you could like nest the dimensions and combine measures and stuff like that. All right, quick time check. I think we're done here for the webinar. Thank you guys for participating in this session. And please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. Thank you.